The Commonwealth of today is a great nation. But it wasn't always so. The early Commonwealth had to be built up from the desolate nuclear wasteland of the past, and taken away from the barbarians that ruled it. The Minutemen victory over the Gunners in late 2288 was a milestone in Commonwealth history. After 200 years of chaos, the region finally had a stable government and a military to protect it. News of the victory spread through the trader caravan networks outside of the Commonwealth region. Soon, immigrants from northern New England, Appalachia, New York, and even as far west as Indiana and Tennessee, made the long and dangerous trek to settle in the Boston area, eager to begin their lives anew. However, the increase in population came with its own problems. Immigrants trying to settle isolated farms still faced the dangers of feral ghouls, super mutants, and raiders. The established settlements were quickly filling up with more settlers than they could handle. In the large cities, street crime was beginning to rise as the homeless had no recourse other than to beg or steal. Finally, some of the new immigrants that came to the Commonwealth came not to work but to plunder. President John Hancock met with Colonel Preston Garvey and several of the leaders of the largest settlements to discuss the growing humanitarian crisis and to come up with solutions to solve this problem before it got worse. They collectively reached the conclusion that now that the gunner threat was gone, that the raider bands, ghoul packs, and super mutant tribes were the major threats that could slow or stop the growth of the nation. Colonel Garvey was therefore tasked with ridding the Commonwealth of these dangers, including feral ghouls, super mutants, and especially the various tribes of raiders that infested the Commonwealth area. His first task was to recall as many Minutemen as he could back to active service. Many Minutemen had left the service after the Gunner War, and persuading them to return was becoming difficult. Veterans that had left the service to start their own homesteads or raise their families were reluctant to put themselves in danger again. Others found more lucrative work enlisting as yeomen to the Brotherhood of Steel. To help persuade them, President Hancock authorized a re-enlistment bonus paid for by tariffs on caravans entering or leaving the Commonwealth region. New immigrants also flocked to recruitment centers. Eager to secure some sort of employment to help their families, scores of newcomers entered the growing ranks of the Minutemen. Garvey reluctantly reached out to the Brotherhood to try and persuade them to join in the fight. He knew that the Brotherhood was notorious for not involving itself in affairs that didn't directly benefit them. He was therefore surprised to hear High Elder Arthur Maxon make a request to visit the castle and plan a joint campaign against raiders, super mutants, and feral ghouls. Maxon explained that the Brotherhood had always stood against ghouls and super mutants since its early days. They had also had to contend with raider problems and were eager to clear the Commonwealth of these threats. Before proceeding, however, Garvey asked Maxon to meet with President Hancock and to iron out a formal cooperation agreement. After some long and sometimes heated conferences, Maxon and Hancock came to an agreement and signed the New England Alliance Treaty, a mutual defense pact between the Commonwealth and the Brotherhood, which recognized the legal status of both parties and pledged them both to military and economic cooperation. This defensive arrangement came to be known as the New England Coalition. The coalition command staff, made up of Brotherhood and Minutemen officers, met at the castle to plot out a strategy to root out all raiders, super mutants, and feral ghouls in and around the Boston area. The coalition concluded that there were 90 sites in and around the Boston area that would have to be reduced. Over half the sites were raider hideouts, with super mutant camps and ghoul nests making up the rest. The staff recommended tackling the raider problem first, as it was the most clear and present threat to the Commonwealth region. The overall strategy was to slowly secure the areas around the major settlements in the downtown Boston area, and to methodically extend the areas under control until all the threats had been eliminated. The hope was that this slow methodical approach would squeeze the life out of the enemy sites and more definitively secure areas. Meanwhile, the raider bands had not been idle. Informants working for the raider bands inside the settlements had relayed the news of the Brotherhood and Minutemen working together. They had passed on rumors of the upcoming campaign to root out the raiders. The leaders of some of the largest raider bands in the Commonwealth did not welcome the news. James Wire, leader of the Libertalia Raiders, sent envoys to the largest raider bands in the Commonwealth to meet and discuss this development. They agreed to meet in Kendal Hospital on the night of the 29th of January. Ivy from the Rust Devils, Bosco from DB Technical, Jared from the Corvega factory, and Judge Zeller from Zeller's army came along with leaders from several of the smaller bands. Wire shared the news of the upcoming Minuteman campaign. The reaction to the news varied. The leaders of some of the smaller bands decided to pack up and leave the Commonwealth as quickly as possible. Others suggested that the news was false and that things would continue as is. Still others wanted to fight the Minutemen. As tempers flared, Judge Zeller quieted them down and proposed that banding their forces together was the only way that they could hope to oppose the combined might of the Minutemen and Brotherhood. Most of the leaders immediately balked at the idea. They would not place themselves at the command of others. Wire pointed out that no single raider band stood a chance against their assembled enemies. The only way to survive would be to band together and hand the Minutemen and Brotherhood so many casualties that they would eventually have to give up. Ultimately, about half a dozen small raider bands decided to leave the Commonwealth area. Another dozen decided to continue acting independently. The rest decided to add their strength to the 5 largest raider groups in the Commonwealth and work under their direction. Wire sent envoys to some of the larger super mutant bands. But none of the envoys returned. Ultimately he decided that they would ignore the super mutants and work alone in the upcoming battles. The Minutemen and Brotherhood slowly built up their numbers through the month of February while conducting neighborhood patrols and clearing out stray raiders and feral ghouls in their patrol areas. All of this changed on what would later be known as the Black Week of the Commonwealth. On February 23, a recruiting drive was taking place in Goodneighbor when an explosion went off near the recruiting desk. 8 were killed, and 24 people were injured. Explosions also took place in Bunker Hill and Sanctuary Hills. In total there were 31 deaths and dozens more were injured. On the 25th, a platoon of Minutemen was dispatched to the Evans Way cul-de-sac near Diamond City, to punish the raiders suspected to be responsible for the explosions. Instead of a dozen sleeping vagrants they ran into 40 heavily armed raiders waiting for them. Only a half-dozen troopers returned. On the night of the 28th a large party of raiders in raider power armor rushed the main gate at Boston Airport. Raider sappers tried to get close enough to shoot missiles at the Peridwin. It was only the quick action of squires, scribes, and yeomen that held off the raiders long enough for more paladins to arrive and deal with the situation. Outlying farming settlements were subject to nightly raids and harassment. The settlement at 10 Pines was overrun and the survivors were dragged off as slaves. Even in secured areas, snipers harassed foot patrols in the Boston area and disappeared as soon as reinforcements arrived. The raider leaders were pleased. The attacks had so far been costly for both the Minutemen and the Brotherhood, and the bombing campaign had created casualties and fear amongst the civilian populace. They were sure that their strategy was breaking the will of the Commonwealth population. Garvey and Maxon met again. The battle plan that they were using wasn't working. The coalition decided to scrap the old plan and devise a plan more suited to this type of opponent. Brotherhood interrogators interviewed prisoners from the raid on the 28th, and after several days of interviews they became aware of the raiders' plans as well as had some leads to likely raider bases. Based on this new information they formulated a new plan codenamed Operation Cromwell. The new plan would apply maximum pressure to the raider strongholds one by one and destroy them in turn. The focus of operations would be to destroy the enemy troops rather than capture territory. Meanwhile, in the large settlements of the Commonwealth a flood of new applicants came forward clamoring to join either the Minutemen or the Brotherhood. Far from being cowed by the attacks, the citizens of the Commonwealth were furious at the raiders and anxious to take revenge on the raider bands. Training camps across the Commonwealth soon filled with new recruits that would be ready by early summer to take the fight to the enemy. In the meantime, the existing Minutemen and Brotherhood troops would have to tackle the enemy by themselves. The first battle of Operation Cromwell took place on the morning of the 8th of March at the Evans cul-de-sac. Just before dawn, a Brotherhood vertibird overflew the target and confirmed the raiders still inhabited the site. Minutemen artillery from the castle opened fire on the area for over an hour before storming parties came in from multiple directions and wiped out the entire raider den. The massacre was a clear statement of intent from the Minutemen and the Brotherhood. This would be a brutal and merciless war. Over the next few months, similar actions were carried out at raider sites across the Commonwealth, slowly whittling away at the raiders' manpower and forcing them to concentrate into a smaller number of bases. While the focus of the war was directly combating the raiders in the city, roving patrols of Minutemen wandered the Commonwealth and answered distress calls from settlers deep in the countryside. Checkpoints scattered through the Commonwealth limited the raiders' mobility. More immigrants could now be moved safely into the countryside to farm, and new settlements were formed. As the campaign progressed into late June and more recruits finished their training, the Minutemen and Brotherhood prepared to take on the larger raider bases. But first they had to take on the most dangerous site in Boston, Trinity Tower. Trinity Tower was one of the largest skyscrapers in Boston and was currently infested by a large band of super mutants. Trinity Tower also lay in the heart of Boston and overlooked several key roads. If the coalition hoped to travel freely back and forth, then Trinity Tower had to be taken. The 3rd and 4th Minuteman companies, veterans of the Med Bay medical battle against the Gunners, were chosen to take the tower. These units already had experience in floor-to-floor and room-to-room fighting. Meanwhile, Brotherhood vertibirds would harass the mutants from above. On June 27, Brotherhood squads sealed off the Trinity Plaza area and stood ready to assist while the Minutemen went inside. The mutants proved to be extremely good at close-quarter battle and tough opponents in hand-to-hand combat. Finally, after 3 long and bloody days, the Minutemen reached the top floors of the tower. In the early hours of July 1st, the top floor of the tower was taken in a confused and bloody fight. The tower had been cleaned out, but the fight had been costly for the Minutemen, and they had over 90 casualties after all was said and done. As both units were no longer combat effective, the 3rd and 4th were taken off the line and sent to garrison Diamond City and recuperate. Around this time the infamous Cambridge Crater Massacre took place. The Cambridge Crater was known to be overrun with feral ghouls. Brotherhood units surrounded the crater and began indiscriminately shooting into the crater. One paladin went as far as starting a contest and offering a prize for the most ghouls killed. A local reporter that was embedded with the troops documented everything. Some in the Commonwealth lauded the massacre, others though, thought it extremely callous and improper. Another group that should not go forgotten were the Children of the Atom. Although religious tolerance was a hallmark of the new Commonwealth, the Children of the Atom cult severely tested this principle. Some chapters were very passive and welcomed strangers, others like the chapter in the Northeast Commonwealth were downright hostile. The coalition began to put together a force to deal with these extremists, when a very nervous man from the Kingsport Lighthouse settlement showed up. He explained that the locals had already taken care of the problem and no troops would be needed in the area. On the 11th of July, came the last great raider offensive of the campaign. A raider task force from Libertalia assembled a half-dozen derelict fishing boats. They sailed deep into the Atlantic to avoid vertibird patrols before sailing back in the middle of the night to land at the Harbourmaster Hotel. Once there, they used the subway and sewer systems to emerge from the Fent Street sewers to attack the main gate at Diamond City. Dozens of raiders attempted to storm the main gate of the city. It was up to the battered remnants of the 3rd and 4th Minutemen to hold the raiders back till dawn. As soon as the sun rose on the 12th, Brotherhood vertibirds appeared overhead, raking the raiders with miniguns. A relief column from Egret Marina made a forced march overnight and finished off the raider force. Infuriated by the assault, President Hancock demanded that the coalition command act. Libertalia was identified as the source of the raid and a plan was formulated to strike back. Brotherhood squads gathered from the north while the 7th Minutemen Company came from Nordhagen in the south. Brotherhood vertibirds prevented any boats from leaving as Minutemen artillery rained down on the site. No mercy was to be shown to the pirates of Libertalia. The pirates stubbornly defended each wrecked boat while raiders on the main ship fired missiles at the approaching troops. Eventually troops finally made it to the main wreck and worked their way up the structure until James Wire surrendered. Wire was taken to the castle. As a former Minuteman officer he faced a general court-martial on the 20th of July. He was charged with mutiny, desertion, plunder, and murder. Wire offered no defense. On the 25th, he was found guilty on all charges and ordered to be executed by firing squad. With the best raider commander now dead, smaller bands of raiders began trying to sneak out of the Commonwealth. Some of these were intercepted as they fled. On August 8, the Brotherhood raided the Fort Hagen satellite array. In the tunnels under the array, the Brotherhood battled the Rust Devils and seemingly endless waves of robots, including suicide iBots, packed with explosives and sent to kill enemies. The Rust Devil leader, Ivy, was killed during the fighting. Her head was placed on a pole in front of Boston Airport. The few prisoners that the Brotherhood took were sent back to Boston Airport to work on repairing and refurbishing high-tech equipment. Some would end up back in the capital wasteland working for the Brotherhood for years to come. Bosco's gang at the DB Technical High School was next to fall. Minutemen forces surrounded the school on the 12th and began moving in. Although the high school was well fortified, they seemed to have a shortage of manpower to man all their defenses. The reason for the manpower shortage became clear as the Minutemen entered the school. Bosco, the raider leader, had gone insane from an infected dog bite weeks earlier. He had been systematically executing and murdering followers that he believed were disloyal. The few remaining raiders in the building gratefully surrendered to the Minutemen. Bosco turned a gun on himself rather than be captured. With the fall of DB Technical, raider resistance across the Commonwealth collapsed. The few remaining raider gangs concentrated at the Corvega plant in Lexington, and at East Boston Prep School. With the raider threat diminished, the Coalition turned their focus to the super mutants of the Commonwealth. The first target would be the legendary monster of Boston Common, Swan. Swan was one of the oldest super mutants in the Commonwealth and had grown to huge proportions, as had his legend. Squads of Minutemen troops surrounded Boston Common on the 16th and fired rockets into the pond to draw the behemoth out of hiding, but nothing occurred. Swan was gone. Scavengers living near the site reported that a very large behemoth had left the pond a few nights earlier and jumped into the Charles River. He was last seen swimming up the Charles River. Super mutant activity across all of the Commonwealth had steadily decreased since early July. In August, a Brotherhood patrol passing by West Everett Estates found the site had been deserted for weeks. A joint Minuteman and Brotherhood task force was formed to assault a super mutant nest in the Commonwealth called the Scrap Palace. However, they found the site vacated. Settlers in nearby Somerville reported that the mutants had been passing near the settlement for weeks and were heading south into the glowing sea. Single mutants, small bands, even entire tribes with their mutant hounds passed by, as if being called by something far to the south. The Coalition would send a few patrols into the glowing sea to look for the mutants, but the leadership decided that their focus had to be on the Commonwealth for now. East Boston Prep School would be the next target on the list for the Coalition. Judge Zeller's band was already large before the Coalition campaign. Now it was estimated that there were over 100 raiders in the school. Minutemen companies and Brotherhood squads ringed the area and prevented anyone from entering or leaving the school. Before the attack commenced, Judge Zeller appeared on the roof with one of the captives from the Ten Pines settlement. He threatened to use the captives as human shields if the Coalition attacked. Star Paladin Olmsted, the senior Brotherhood commander on the scene, called back to the Pridwin to get instructions on how to proceed. Elder Maxon spoke just one word: Scourge. Paladin Olmsted well knew the story of how the Brotherhood had scourged the pit in 2255 and understood the Elder's order. The Brotherhood took out their Gatling lasers and missile launchers and marched into the school, firing as they went.
Ad Victoria!
Only 3 badly wounded captives came out of the rubble of East Boston Prep. Zeller's badly burnt head went to decorate a pole next to Ivy's at the airport. Reactions throughout the Commonwealth ranged from muted horror to unfettered approval. Though all admired the skill of the Brotherhood as warriors, some questioned their lack of restraint in battle. A motley collection of raider bands now cowered in Lexington, the last raider stronghold. They prepared to make their final stand in and around the ruins of the Corvega factory. On August 24th, artillery batteries from Grey Garden and Starlight Drive-In fired on Lexington for 2 days. Brotherhood and Minutemen Vertibirds delivered troops to Mystic Pines, Mass Gravel, and Rocky Narrows Park. In total 3 Minutemen companies, 16 squads of Brotherhood yeomen, and 6 squads of Brotherhood paladins gathered round Lexington. The desperate raiders turned the buildings of the city into armored fortresses. The subsequent Battle of Lexington saw some of the heaviest and most brutal street fighting of the entire war. In some cases, the coalition had to physically collapse the buildings rather than take them in order to clear out the raiders inside. On the 29th, the last building fortress was taken and the assault on the factory could begin. Counter-snipers and vertibird flybys picked off any raider snipers hiding in the scaffolding. A platoon of elite Minutemen scouts entered the factory by tunnels underneath the structure and began fighting their way up. Meanwhile, Brotherhood power armor burst through the front door and systematically began taking rooms one by one. Jared and his crew made their last stand in the main assembly room. Although it was a hard fight, the coalition won the day. Jared, the last great raider leader, was dead. The raider bands within the Commonwealth had been functionally destroyed. Although there would be thieves and bandits that roamed the countryside for years to come, the organized raider bands no longer existed. Feral ghouls would be a hazard that would persist. As buildings and subway tunnels were rehabilitated, sometimes pre-war feral ghouls would be found lurking in the rubble. Thereafter, Commonwealth officials insisted on having troops present for any construction projects. The mystery of what happened to the super mutants of the Commonwealth would remain for years to come. Some speculated that they left to form their own nation deep inside the radioactive wastes of the glowing sea. But no one wanted to wander the poisoned land just to find a large horde of super mutants waiting for them. Arthur Maxon was pleased with the results of the war. Not only had his troops performed admirably, but they had completed an alliance with a growing power in the East. If the NCR ever came east, they would find a powerful Eastern Brotherhood backed by strong allies. The Brotherhood could now wind down their operations in the Commonwealth and return the Pridwin and most of the troops back to the capital wasteland. President Hancock's popularity soared by the end of the war. He was easily able to win re-election for the next 2 terms. Nobody would dare question his decisions for years to come. No longer hobbled by the barbarian hordes that had plagued it, the Commonwealth grew and prospered. Farms, mines, and cities sprung up in every corner of the new nation. In time the Commonwealth would rival the NCR in wealth and prosperity. But challenges still lay ahead for the young nation.
And that is what we require from you.
I can help, but I'm going to need something in return.
And what can the Enclave do for you?